Society. My title is Vice President of Animal Welfare. I oversee all of the clinics in the shelters from an operations perspective. So we're going to talk today a little bit about the Michigan Humane Society. We're going to talk about hurricanes and responding to hurricanes and what that might look like so that you guys can kind of apply that to your projects. And then we're going to talk a lot about dog and cat kenneling and styles of kenneling to try to help you make that connection to your projects. Okay, who are we? Well, the Michigan Humane Society, or MHS, is the oldest and largest shelter in Michigan. So we actually have multiple locations. We have a location in Rochester, a location in Detroit right off of I-75, and then we also have a location in Westland. And so if any of you guys have been to IKEA, that might help you kind of place where that Westland shelter is. It's a bit away, it's about an hour away. We also have some off-site adoption locations. So we have Petco in Sterling Heights, PetSmart in Roseville, and then our Premier Pet, which is a pretty new pet store. There's a few locations popping up. We have a few cats in those locations. So at each of our locations, we have a shelter where we care for animals. We also have an intake center, an adoption center, and a full-service veterinary clinic at each of our locations. The cool part about MHS is 100% of the healthy and treatable animals are placed. So any animal that can be placed with a family will be placed at our organization. We're a nonprofit organization, and all of our donations come from private funders. So a lot of people think Michigan Humane Society is affiliated with HSUS, which is the Humane Society of the United States. And that actually isn't true. Though we do some work with them, we also do work with the ASPCA and lots of other organizations. We are a private organization, and we're privately funded by folks like each of your families have helped supported the MHS. All right, so some things to know. Last year, we placed 11,053 animals in our organization. So that's the number of homes that we found, which is pretty exciting. We have over 900 active volunteers in our organization, folks like each of you coming and helping us in different ways. And then we have, like I said, 3 full-service veterinary clinics where anyone can bring their animal, whether you've adopted from us or not. And we have about 200 staff members, of which the majority of those, probably about 150 to 160, work in our shelters and clinics and report to me. So I have a big staff. Types of animals we help, so of course, dogs and cats. Small and furry, rabbits, mice, guinea pigs, hamsters, an occasional chinchilla. There's a young lady in the back that has a chinchilla. Occasionally, some farm animals, so sometimes horses, we get horses. People try to have horses in the city of Detroit, and that is not legal, so sometimes we have to take some horses into our Rochester facility. And this year we've had 3 potbelly pigs that we found homes for. So of that 11,053, 3 of them were potbelly pigs. We do take wildlife, squirrels, baby birds, deer, ducks. We actually have a duck right now at our Rochester facility, a very cute duck that will talk back to you if you talk to him in duck language. We also do birds, snakes, lizards, things like that. Okay, so we do help animals, that's most of what we do, but we also do other things in the community. So inside of our animal care shelters, we assess every animal, medically and behaviorally, when they come in, to determine what they might need before they go up for adoption. We give every animal preventative care, vaccines, we help clear them of worms, we might give them heartworm prevention, we might give them flea and tick prevention. We spay and neuter every animal that goes up for adoption. We do over 11,000 spay and neuters every year. Dentistry, we're doing more and more animal dentistry every day, which is one of my favorite things to do, pulling teeth and cleaning teeth. Medical and surgical treatments and behavior modification. So we have a whole behavior team that help animals that might have some challenges behaviorally. Okay. So outside of our animal care centers, we actually have a cruelty and rescue team. So this is one of those gentlemen here after he saved a litter of puppies. He's very dirty, as you can tell. A lot of times it's under porches, down in places where animals get themselves that we have to go and rescue them. We do actually have a cruelty team that will go out and investigate acts of neglect or cruelty to animals, and we do and have prosecuted a number of cases against that as well. There is often a link between animal cruelty and human crime, and we do a lot of education around that as well. Statewide response, so we go and help other animal shelters across the state, as well as other animal control agencies. We help with education, things like that. We have a food pantry, so just like people sometimes need help with food, we actually have an animal food pantry where people can come and get food for their pets if they can't afford to buy it. We do low-cost vaccination clinics in parks, and we provide veterinary care, subsidized veterinary care to folks that maybe don't have money. We do what's called trap, neuter, return. So a lot of cats live outside. They're wild cats. So we will actually spay and neuter them and give them a rabies vaccine, which helps protect them against getting rabies, and also will help prevent them from reproducing, because that's where a lot of kittens that are surrendered to shelters come from. They come from outdoor cats that are reproducing. Humane education, so much like we're doing today, we go out into schools and community and talk about what we do. We do a lot of events. We do dog walks, we do adoption events, we might do a fundraising event, things like that. And we help families with resources to keep their pets. So someone asked us if we're increasing what we're doing, or kind of what our goals are as a shelter, and if we could put out in the newspaper in 5 years a headline, we would love that headline to say, "Shelter closes, not needed anymore," because all of the animals have homes. That's ultimately our goal. So if we can keep a pet in a family by providing resources of one kind or another, we try to do that. Okay, so we also respond to things nationwide. So when there is a natural disaster, shelters from all over the country go to help to see what they can do. And there's two different ways that we can respond to a hurricane. One is we might go ahead of time before the hurricane lands, and we might take animals from shelters in that area that might get hit by the hurricane and move them north or east or west away from the hurricane, so that those shelters, if they're going to get hit, that those animals aren't in danger, or so that those shelters can be emptied so that they can receive animals in need once the hurricane hits. So that's one way we respond, is by going and getting animals. Another way that we might respond is to go and help. So once the hurricane hits, a lot of animals are displaced or separated from their families, and so they'll come to a shelter, and then we need to care for them temporarily until they can get back with their family. Sometimes families can't, they might lose their house and where they're staying when it's at pets, so those temporary shelters might house those animals until they're able to find a place where they can take that pet. So that's where you guys all come in, and that's creating a kenneling system or kennels to help with the temporary shelter. We're going to talk a little bit about what that might look like. So you can see in this picture that there's some dirt floor. They're probably in some kind of pavilion. You see some kenneling in the background. There's different types of kennels. There's an airline, what we call an airline crate, which is those hard plastic sided crates. And then there's wire kenneling. And we're going to talk about what it is that animals need out of a kennel and what is the best type of kennel that you might create. These are hurricanes that we've responded. The last one where we sent a team was Hurricane Harvey, not this last year, but the year before. We sent a team of 8, 2 folks that helped with search and rescue, and 6 folks that were either medical or shelter team to help with animals that got displaced by the hurricane. So let's talk a little bit about timing with a hurricane, right? So have any of you guys been listening to your parents or seeing the news on, and you hear like hurricane's coming, and it seems like it takes forever for it to get there, right? And then sometimes it changes course and all of that. There's actually quite a lot of time. Something like a tornado that hits instantly, a hurricane's a little bit different. We can see it coming. So it gives us some time to respond. We usually know about a week in advance. It gives us time to move animals north and empty those shelters. The biggest problem, though, is we don't exactly know where it's going to hit. So we think it's going to hit. It might hit here. So we try to move animals out of here, but it might hit down here. So we really stay close to that weather person, trying to figure out exactly where it's going to hit. Most of the teams are deployed once the hurricane hits. So we might drive down and stay out here until we know for sure where it hits, and then drive into the area that's most impacted, or sometimes boat into the area that's most impacted. This is what it might look like responding in a hurricane. So this picture down here and the one up there are pictures that were actually taken by our team that responded to a hurricane. The other two are just examples of what that might look like. Animals try to get to the highest area when water starts to come in from the hurricane. Flooding is the biggest problem that they see. Here is a situation where an owner and her animal are being rescued together. And that's really important because there was actually a law that was that just came about in 2006. Prior to 2006, it was not legal for folks to, for like FEMA or government agencies to rescue pets. People were the priority. And in 2006, after Hurricane Katrina, the laws changed. And there was a new law called PETS that was created to help. So now rescue folks can not only rescue the humans, but the animals alongside them. They also can go and just rescue animals, which is pretty amazing. That also has allowed, people used to stay behind because of their pets. They didn't want to leave their pets. And so now it helps with people too, and rescuing people because now their pets can go with them, which is pretty great. Okay, so staging for a hurricane might look like this. There are different places where that staging might happen. There's a slide that's coming up that is a gym. You'll see it's kind of a wood floor and then they have a tarp laid down. Here's a tarp laid down. These surfaces are dirt. It can happen inside of a barn, a picnic shelter, fairgrounds. These are places that a temporary shelter might be set up. So as you're thinking about your creating systems that you're creating for this, thinking about those crates being able to be moved to an area like this, right? Being collapsible, stackable, all of those things are pretty important. Just kind of thinking about what that might look like. Here's a team of folks that most of these guys in blue and dark blue are MHS staff, where they're vaccinating and providing care for animals that came into the temporary shelter. So every animal that comes into a shelter needs to have a basic set of vaccines and worrying to make sure that they're healthy as possible when they come in. Okay, here's some more examples of temporary housing. Here's a wire crate, and you'll notice that there are cardboard barriers, and that's to help so that that dog can't see to the right or left of him. When you're thinking about housing, and we're going to talk about this in a second, there's different things that you need to be thinking about, and this will come into play in a little bit here. Then you see the airline carriers there. You've got food stacked on top. You've got toys, leashes. There's a little plastic sleeve right here and right there where the information for that animal is kept, right? So it's really important once these animals come together that we make sure we keep track of them and any information about their family. That stuff can get wet, it can get torn. The animals a lot of times will play with it and then paw it into the kennel, so just be thoughtful about how you're going to protect that information so that the animals aren't eating it, because that can happen. Then you can see two kennels right next to each other, an airline carrier, and then again that wire crate with a couple animals in there with a blanket on top. Okay, so we talked about two different ways that we respond to hurricanes. So the first way is to transport animals up and away from and out of danger. And so this is actually our team just a few weeks ago. We responded to a need. They had some chihuahuas out in California that needed some help. They were overwhelmed. The shelters were overwhelmed and had too many. And so we worked with a company that flies animals around the country. It's called Wings of Rescue. And Wings of Rescue brought us 100 Chihuahuas. And this is them. They were super cute. Notice that these guys are wearing protective barrier. So they're wearing a disposable gown and gloves, and that's to help with disease transmission between animals. And then you can see the crates that they were transported in. And the neckband that has identification on it as well. Okay, disease spread. So as you're thinking about your kennel, thinking about how diseases spread. So each of these animals in a rescue situation are in individual houses, and then we're going to bring them all together, right? It's like mixing at the beginning of the school year, right? All of you guys have been spending time in your own houses in the summer, right? And in the fall, we usually have some major respiratory outbreak in schools, right, where y'all are getting sick. And that's because y'all are bringing your germs together and you're mixing them about, right? You're sneezing on each other. Hopefully you're not doing nose to nose. Direct contact, hands, right? You're helping each other, and so that sometimes can spread disease. So thinking about the different ways that disease can be spread. Aerosol, for example, out into the air. So if you have open kennels that are wired, for example, that the animals can touch their noses, so they can spread, or if they can sneeze on each other, they can spread disease. Also, they can spread disease through their fecal material, through urine. So thinking about making sure that they're easy to clean. Contaminated bedding, housing, food and water bowls, and toys, right? So thinking about the equipment that you're going to put in those kennels, making sure that it's easy to clean. If you have blankets in your kennel, how are you going to wash those in between animals in a park setting or out on a fairgrounds? So be thinking about that as well. Okay, so I wanted to share with you Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So this gentleman down here developed a hierarchy of needs for people. And this is very well known that all people need these 5 things. The animal sheltering world has adapted this to pets as well. The more and more we learn about dogs and cats, the more and more we find that our pets need these 5 things as much as we do. We do a really good job with physiological, right? We know that we're providing food and water and shelter for them. Safety, we do a pretty good job with that. Consistency, we love them. We trust these animals. We do a really good job there. As we move a little bit further up, it gets a little bit more difficult to provide all of the animals, all of these different things outside of a loving home because of the time it takes and the interaction and the cost associated with it. So, but dogs want to bond with people, they want to bond with other dogs, and they want to play. So be thinking about those needs. They also want to learn things. Dogs want to learn things. They want to use their brains. Cats too. And then also they want to solve problems. And we don't think about that. We don't think about our pets wanting to solve problems. But that helps. The more we engage our pets' minds, the happier and healthier that they are. So our behavior team is working more and more with every animal to make sure that we're doing that. We call this enrichment. Challenging them and challenging their minds is so, so important for animals. Okay, so things that you guys need to consider when you're building your kennels. Size and space. So we're going to talk about both cats and dogs and what they need from a sizing and spacing requirement. So each one is a little bit different, and so we'll talk through that here in a second. Material. You want to make sure that the material that you use has sound deadening, so be thinking about like a wire crate or a metal stainless steel crate and a big Labrador banging his tail against the crate, right? Think about the noise that that would make. Now think about that noise times 100 if you put 100 animals in a big pavilion. And then if they can see each other and they're barking, right? So think about that noise level and how that might be stressful for dogs. And especially thinking about dogs and cats together, okay, and the difference between that. The material needs to be able to be cleaned and disinfected. So think about a smooth surface that's not porous, meaning it can't absorb things, okay? So like a plastic's a little bit porous, but there's composite materials that are smooth, that don't absorb. Metal, like stainless, is smooth and doesn't absorb, but it's loud. So you kind of have to weigh those two things. It needs to be able to be cleaned and disinfected. Easy access. So remember, we're going to be taking dogs and cats in and out of these kennels, right? And then we need to get in and out to clean. So be thinking about that. Mobility. We need to be able to move these kennels to an outside location, right? Like a fairgrounds or a barn. We need to move them from the shelter out there. And so they need to be probably collapsible, stackable. We talked a little bit about that already. Ventilation. So we want to worry about disease spread, so we want to try to have some solid walls, but on the other hand, we also need to worry about ventilation. It's really hot in the south, so how do we make sure that there's good airflow in each of those kennels? Protection from the elements. So though we might have a pavilion, that pavilion might be open air. So it might be hot, it might be cold, it might be raining, right? So just be thinking about the elements as well. Sound, we talked a little bit about that already. Metal has a higher sound. Composite material has a lower sound. Wire might have more ventilation than a solid wall, but the solid wall is going to help with stress. So a balance of those things. Let's see, barriers to sight and noises, right? So be thinking, again, you're going to put all of these animals in this big pavilion. If they can see each other, there's higher disease spread, and then there's also more noise. Let's see. Identification, making sure there's a place to identify the animal, both the actual animal and then the kennel itself, to make sure that dogs and cats are going back to the right kennel. And then supplies, a place to store that animal's supplies, food, water bowls, things like that. Okay, let's talk about cats. So there's a lot of research that talks about cats and how much space they need. Have you guys ever been to a shelter or a place where they're housing cats and they're in the litter box and they're sleeping in the litter box? And you're like, that's crazy. Why are they sleeping in their litter box, right? And it's because those animals don't have adequate spacing in that kennel, or they don't have a place to hide. So they're trying to hide in their litter box, right? Because it's like this tall. So if you give them enough space, they need 2 feet between their litter and their bed and their food. So you can go up or you can go out, either way, but they need to have that 2 foot of separation. They also need a place to hide. So if you give them that, then they won't stay in their litter box. And they'll be comfortable and laying around. So here you can see a typical kennel would be one side of this kenneling system. But you see there's a hole in there, it's called a portal. And what we have done is portalized all of our kennels to open up the space to make sure that our cats have 2 feet of separation between all of their food, their bed, and their litter. And that allows them to have a bathroom on one side and a bed and their food and water on the other, which is makes them much happier and healthier. This is what a typical kennel would look like inside of a shelter. There's different types. So the one on the far right is a stainless steel kenneling system. It's like this, solid stainless steel walls with a grate in the front. As we're finding that this metal is loud, we're moving to more of these composite glass front type of kenneling. So at our Detroit shelter, we actually have this where there's glass on the back, and then we have windows on the outside. And that allows them to look outside and play with the birds and things like that. So it's much more stimulating for them. Just like you can see here, they can see outside, which is makes them happier. You can see here that 2 foot of separation goes up, not out. So it's tall, lots of shelves, and then their litter is in this compartment that's separated out. This kenneling system in the middle, you can see the little holes there. Those all are ventilation holes, so each one of those pods is ventilated separately. That helps with disease, it helps with ventilation, it helps get them the air that they need, and then it's nice and quiet in there from a sound perspective. So these types of kenneling systems for 4 kennels might cost about $6,000, whereas if we go back to these crates, these type of crates here and there, those might be $50 to $100. So you're talking about $400 for kennels versus $6,000, depending on what you want. Yeah?
Like for the kennels, are
How do you open them? So a lot of those are accessed from the back. So these, you can see there's a lock here that opens up from the front. These probably go to the outside. So yeah, same thing. Here's a little keyhole. These all open from the front. But here, there's a little latch. That's a great question, though. Yeah?
What's the general budget of Michigan Humane Society?
That's a really great question. We're going to get to it at the very end, okay? There is a budget for each animal in a shelter. There's not a lot of budget dollars for a hurricane. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. But that's a great question. Okay, dog spacing needs. So dogs, it's a little bit different. They're a little bit more social. Don't get scared quite as easy. They do still get scared. But for a dog, all they need to be able to do is stand up, turn around, lay down, stretch out, room for food and water, a nice soft bed to lay on, easy to clean and disinfect. That's so important, and privacy. So you can see up there, there's some wire crates. One has a bed, but no place for food and water. You see the other one has a nice, thick pad that's easy to clean. So it's soft to lay on, but easy to clean. If you think about the other bed, you're going to need a washer and a dryer or some way to do laundry in order to have that. And if you think about a hurricane and setting up in a pavilion, you're not necessarily going to have the ability to do that. Down there you see that there's a towel, food and water. That kennel is plenty big for that dog. They can lay down, stand up, turn around, things like that. This one might be a little bit too small. You can see that he's kind of scrunched up a little bit, so that dog might need a little bit more space. Okay, privacy is really important. We talked about noise. The more that dogs can see each other, the more noise there's going to be because they're going to respond to those dogs around them. Metal is louder, right, than plastic or composite, so be thinking about that too. Okay, so dog kenneling systems inside of a shelter might look like something like this. So the one over there, you can see the solid partitions. On the yellow side, they don't have nose to nose, or they don't have aerosol. They can't see the other dogs. On the back side, they can, and it's kind of in between, right? They can see that other dog, but they have a place that they can go and hide if they don't want to, right? So it kind of gives them some options. Here, there is no sight of other dogs. And then there's also this little doorway. You see this doorway between this kennel and that kennel? So if you have multiple animals, it'd be really great if the kennel had a door that you could connect multiple kennels together. Just like the portal with the cat kennels. If you have more than one cat and you want to house them together, think about how you could link those kennels so that those animals could stay together. So in this situation, you've got a dog that can travel back and forth in that kennel area. Okay, budget, to get to your question here. So it costs about $300 a day per animal in a shelter. And each animal stays on average 5 days. Some stay a little less, some stay a little bit more. If we had 11,053 animals, you can see that would be $16 million and some change just to pay for basic food and water, basic enrichment, some preventative care, medical treatment. More than 60% of the animals that come to us need some kind of medical treatment. Behavior modification, it takes labor or people to do all of those things, so veterinarians, technical staff, cleaning folks, animal care folks, and our adoption folks. And then facility costs. Costs to heat the building, and costs to provide electricity, and maintenance, and administration. All of the money that we use to pay for all of these things for the animals comes from folks like your parents, so private donors. There's often no money budgeted for natural disasters, okay? So, knock on wood, the Michigan Humane Society hasn't seen a natural disaster in the how many ever years that they've been out, right? So we wouldn't put money in the budget for something like that. There is insurance, should that happen, right? But sometimes insurance takes time to come to fruition. There are federal programs, too, that help fund, but for the most part, there's no money. Okay, folks that live in the in the hurricane zone might have a little more money set aside than maybe folks in the north, but for the most part, there is no money set aside. Organizations like the Michigan Humane Society that respond to hurricanes will put aside some money for equipment, trucks, things like that, crates, to go south to help with hurricanes. But it's kind of a new thing in regards to the budget. So the cheaper that you can make the crates, the better, because shelters generally don't have a lot of money to spend on it. Okay, so these are some of our favorite rescues. So the one with the cute big eyes, that squish fish patty on a bun, that is Emily's kitty cat. Emily's kitty cat came to us. She was less than a pound. That's her down there in that little stocking cap. One of our rescue drivers was walking through the shelter with that little kitty in a cap around her neck, and I grabbed him. She became part of our family. So now Squish runs around. She's a bigger kitty. Right there, that's Smokey. That's one of Emily's friends' cats. And then Smokey's brother, Dexter, is this pit bull-looking thing back here. Dexter came from our Detroit shelter, and Smokey came from Westland. And then this is Belle. This is our dog. She's a golden retriever that we were talking about earlier. Belle is also a rescue, not from Michigan Humane Society, but she needed a surgery when she was 12 weeks old, which is how we got her. Her family couldn't afford the surgery, so we took her in and did the surgery for her, and she's now 11 and a half. So, all right. And that's all I have. So if you guys have some questions for me, happy to answer them.
Do you suspect there'll be the same amount of animals this year?
Do I suspect that there'll be the same amount of animals in our shelter? Yeah, we've been talking about that. That's a really great question. It's kind of a philosophical question. As we take on more and more animals that need more and more care, years ago, it used to be puppies and kittens that we would get in a shelter, unwanted puppies and kittens. And now, because we've done such a great job with sterilization, so fixing animals so they can't have babies, now we see older pets that need a little bit more care. So I don't know that the numbers will go up. They'll probably start to go down a little bit, which is what we want. We want animals to stay in homes and not come to the shelter, for sure. So I would say about the same, if not a few less, next year. Yeah.
Are there any pigs left for adoption?
Are there any pigs left for adoption? I wish there were, but they're not. They're gone. Sorry. Which we're very happy for, because potbelly pigs are sometimes a little hard to place.
So, do you want to link the kennels so that, the dogs can play with each other, or just so they have more space?
So the way we would want to link the kennels on occasion when there's more than one animal that came from a family. So if we, in a hurricane situation, if Mrs. Jones has 2 cats, we want those cats to stay together because that's probably less stressful for them. You're probably not going to be able to create a kennel that's big enough that they can play. We would probably have volunteers take them out for walks and maybe have an arena where they might be able to play.
And how do you handle, dogs going to the bathroom?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So as you're thinking about your kenneling system, so the kennels in our shelter actually have drains. For the dogs, they have drains that help with that. In a temporary situation, you're probably not going to be able to do that, but those that have great innovation, that would be a great problem to solve, because if you could contain that, it would be easier on the kennel workers, for sure.
So what kind of events do you do?
Oh, what kind of events do we do? We do all kinds of events. So one that I've been involved in, we do, it's called Bark in the Park, where people can bring their animals to the baseball game at Tiger Stadium. And they get to they have a play pool and all kind of fun stuff. So we sponsor that event. We do walks, like our Mega March for animals. So Emily's actually gone and helped me a little bit at those walks because I've had to work those before. So you come and you bring your pet, and there's an entrance fee, and you get to walk a trail system with your pet, which is kind of fun. So those are a couple of events that we do. Any other questions? No? All right. Oh, yeah.
What do you think would be more important, noise or really ability
Noise or what?
Ability to clean.
Ability to clean or noise. If I had to choose, the ability to clean would be more important from a disease spread perspective. They're both important, but if I had to choose between the two, that would probably have a bigger priority. It's a great question. Any other questions? Yeah.
How many, so generally when you go out to rescue animals, like how many animals are usually transported?
That's a good question. So when we go to rescue animals, how many animals are transported? I think it depends on the situation. But when we transport animals, there's only so many spots on a truck that we can put animals, right? So that is a limiting factor sometimes. The shelter itself can be a limiting factor. The number of actual spaces you have would be the number of animals that you would be able to help. So I think it just kind of depends. So like our shelters, we're limited to the number of animals that we can take because we only have so many kennels that we can put them in. And we talked a little bit about the cats and having that portal between those two kennels. If we shut that portal, we could put 2 animals in that kennel instead of 1. The problem is then the stress of that animal goes up, that animal gets sick, it stays longer, and then we can't find as many animals home. So we have to be careful with that. We do always push what we call our capacity for care, but sometimes when you do that, it creates other problems.
So would you recommend more putting multiple animals, you wouldn't recommend putting multiple animals in the same cage?
Only if they came from the same house. Only if they came from the same house. And we would never put dogs and cats together because in that situation they might do things that aren't predictable just because of the stress of everything. So we would always separate dogs and cats. But we might put 2 dogs together if they came from the same house and if the space permitted. Yeah?
Do you neuter all your animals?
We do. We spay and neuter. By law, we have to in order to place an animal up for adoption. Sometimes we will place it up for adoption not spayed or neutered, but we follow up to make sure that they do. So we call that home on contract. So you can take it home a little early if it's not quite ready for sterilization, but it always has to be fixed. Yeah?
If the dog and cat live together before you rescue them, do you put them in the same cage or do you still separate?
We don't. We separate them just because cats get so, I'm going to use our cat for example. Our cat is super social, but when somebody comes over that they don't know, our cat goes and hides. And so cat's behavior will change in a stressful situation like that, so we would never want to put a cat and dog together. And in dogs sometimes we call it redirecting, but if they get really stressed, they might bite because they're stressed, and we wouldn't want that to happen with a big animal and a small animal. So we do separate dogs and cats. They also kind of need different housing, as we talked, right? Cats need a little bit more space and they need a little quieter environment. Dogs can do better with a little bit lesser space. So, other questions? Really good questions, you guys. I'm going to go in the back and then I'll come back to you. Yeah. What's the most important component when making a dog crate? You know, I think if we go back to these pieces, right? It depends on what we're going to use the dog crate for. So for hurricanes, I would say mobility is pretty important, being able to move them, right? If they're too heavy, you're not going to be able to set them up in an environment. So I think mobility is pretty important. The ability to clean them and disinfect them in an environment outside, right? So if they're too intricate, you won't be able to clean and disinfect them. And then I think the ventilation. So if you think about being in the South during hurricane season, it's wet, it's hot, it's humid. So ventilation is going to be a big piece. And being able to keep those animals cool if we're going to set up outside in a pavilion. Yeah.
How big would at what point would the size of the crate affect someone being, or at what size would it be too big to carry?
Oh, that's a good question. Like how heavy? You probably wouldn't want it bigger than one person could carry. So I'm going to say most people can carry about 50 pounds, most adults. So you wouldn't want the kennel to be much heavier than 50 to maybe 75 pounds, maybe. But 50 pounds would be a good size, right? Thinking about a bale of hay, right? Most people can pick up a bale of hay, and that's about 50 to 70 pounds. Great question. Other questions that you guys might have? Yeah.
What if the animal weighs more than that 50 pounds?
So the animals. So what if the animal weighs more than that 50 pounds? Most animals can walk, so we don't have to carry them. So they just walk. Now, if they can't walk, then we use stretchers, and then we use more than one person. Yep, but that's a great question. We do sometimes see that in the clinic where we have like big Great Danes or big, like Burmese Mountain Dogs that weigh way more than 50 pounds. And we have lift tables that help with that to bring the animals up. We also have rolling gurneys that we can put them on. It's a great question, though. Do you have a question? No? Okay, just stretching. All right. Anything else, you guys? All right. Oh, was there another one over here somewhere? Yeah.
Would it really be too big for a handle? Or how do they usually carry it?
Yeah, so some of those foldable wire crates have a handle, which if you've ever carried one of those really big, heavy wire crates, having that handle or two handles would be amazing. So that would really help with carrying those kennels around. Absolutely. Great question. All right, guys. I think that's it. Good luck on your projects.